Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
We are back to talking about the farmers' issues today because protests are on, talks are going on, not successfully as yet, and also issues have risen about Modi government's new agriculture reform bills. Now, we had in an earlier Cut the Clutter spoken about these bills in detail, and our conclusion was that these are reformist bills. They will suit the consumer, the farmer, and what is market friendly is not necessarily farmer unfriendly. These bills in fact align the farmer with the market and gives the farmer access to a much larger market. That was our view then, that is our view now also. Now at the same time, a lot of people are upset and they are quite passionate about their fears and insecurities. So we will talk essentially about two things today, two issues that keep coming up all the time in your headlines and also in your prime time viewing in the evenings. One is MSP, minimum support price, and second is APMC Act, Agricultural Produce Marketing Committee Act, which is going to be rolled back, which is going to be in a way withdrawn. Some states have done that already. And MSP, which is not being withdrawn. MSP is not part of any law, so it will be withdrawn. But the fear is that when private mandis come up and corporates come to buy there, they will not be bound to buy at least at MSP or higher. So they may buy cheaper. Now you might say this is market forces. If the existing mandi where government comes to procure is giving you more, which is MSP is more than market price, why would anybody go and sell at the other mandi? But that right now is not being taken seriously simply because the farmers don't trust the government. They think that this is just the beginning. After this, the government will take away the procurement structure brick by brick by brick by brick. Now, let's first understand where do APMC and where does MSP come from, and these two have very interesting origins. Now APMC, the British, when we were a colony, the British wanted Indians to grow or colonies to grow the raw material, so cheap raw material would become available to their factories in Britain. So one of those raw materials they wanted out of India in large quantities was cotton. So it was basically to procure more and more cotton through a government machinery that APMC's Act-like laws were enacted. So farmers could only come and sell here, and government agents or government appointed agents or commission agents or middlemen would buy it, and together they will cartelize, or government will declare a price and they'll keep the price to a certain level. I don't know all the details of that, but generally that was the purpose. That's how APMCs came in to begin with. So they are rooted in colonial practices. That's one. Where does the MSP come from? That's even more interesting. Now MSP was India's response to the old tradition of price controls. Now, who brought in price controls for agricultural goods in India? So you have to go further back. You have to go several centuries back behind the British times. So go right back to the times of Alauddin Khilji. He was a tough ruler, tougher than what Ranveer Singh has made him out to be even in that film, Padmavat. But Alauddin Khilji was also a confiscatory ruler. Many of those rulers were confiscatory, but he much more so. So his taxation was very rough. If you did not pay the taxes, his cavalry could visit you and burn your house and poison your well and take your cattle. It wasn't a nice thing to deal with that kind of regime. But he also put in price controls on Indian agricultural commodities. Why? Because he wanted his soldiers, who were essentially of Turkic origin, who were living in garrisons outside big cities, as armies usually tend to do, they should continue to get grain at a cheaper price. So even if there's a famine or there are shortages, grain price should not go up. So India had since then inherited a tradition of price controls. Now we come right back to 1960s. 1960s is when India is experiencing massive food shortages. There are big famines, particularly say Bihar, 66, 67. India is really suffering, and India is living humiliatingly the ship to mouth existence. So ships are bringing wheat from America, and frankly, a lot of the Indian people had a very tough time getting used to that wheat. But this wheat would come, and newspaper headlines used to be 2 more ships arrive in Mumbai, like that, Bombay those days, like that. When India had that kind of dependence, and India also wanted the green revolution, India wanted to increase its grain production so that this dependence would go down. A lot of the work on the green revolution and the reform of Indian agriculture, particularly bringing in new technologies and research in new seeds and new breeding, also was done with American help. The grain assistance to India, or the aid to India, was coming as part of a scheme called PL 480, which was a kind of aid scheme. So basically, the Americans sent India the grain India needed. It was actually surplus grain in America. In return for this, India notionally paid the Americans something, but Americans spent that money in India. That is the general definition. It's not a technically perfect definition of PL 480. But this gave America some leverage also with government of India. So this is the time when Lyndon Johnson was president of America after Kennedy's assassination, and India had had political instability. Nehru had gone in 64, Shastri came in 65, January 66, Shastri was gone, Indira Gandhi came, 67, Congress party suffered big setbacks in general elections, became much weaker, economy was in the dumps, and ship to mouth humiliation was going on. At that time, Lyndon Johnson's government persuaded or pressured, you can choose your expression. If you call it pressure, I would disagree, because I think it was, even if it was pressure, it was good pressure. So that administration then persuaded government of India to move away from price controls, because they said as long as you have price controls, you are giving no incentive to your farmer to produce more. On the other hand, you give subsidies to your farmer by way of water, electricity, seeds, technology, but at the same time, instead of price controls, give your farmer a minimum support price. So your farmer has the assurance that if I am growing this grain, I am provided that I get all the inputs and everything right, and I adopt modern technologies, I get this output, I am guaranteed that price. Because one more insecurity was that what if India's grain production goes too high? If it goes too high or too much grain becomes available in the market, suddenly with not enough storage for a year, then the market prices will crash. So MSP was also supposed to protect the farmer from sudden crashes in market price. Now, Green Revolution was basically focused in what was then Punjab, and there were many reasons. One reason was that obviously Punjab's farmers are very industrious, and Punjab had a record and history of producing very good agriculture, particularly when it came to wheat. Punjab was a wheat power, all of Punjab, on our side of Punjab and Pakistani side of Punjab. Second, Punjab had the rivers, and in the 50s, India had invested a great deal building Bhakra Dam, Nangal, and then more, and the canal systems. So Punjab had irrigation, and also Punjab had some very wise people, Dr. M.S. Randhawa, for example. These were people who then tied in Punjab Agriculture University. They tied in with the scientists, Norman Borlaug, Dr. M.S. Swaminathan. They all got together and they bred new varieties of wheat. More irrigation was provided. Farmers took to it on the guarantee of the MSP. In the process, in 10 years, India's wheat production doubled. So by around 1970-71, you could say that India was self-sufficient in wheat. And then wheat began to grow elsewhere in India also. So India hasn't really had a wheat shortage since then. India has had a wheat surplus since then. A similar revolution, not so much due to hybrids, but although hybrids have come in and more developed seeds have come in, including from our PUSA Institute, that is Indian Agricultural Research Institute for paddy as well, but more because of irrigation. Not just in Punjab or Haryana in 1966, in the middle of just when the Green Revolution work was beginning, Punjab and Haryana split. So Haryana also developed, and Haryana also became quite a peer of Punjab in terms of agricultural surpluses, grain surpluses, although much smaller than Punjab in size and in population. So paddy increased as irrigation increased. Paddy increased in many parts of India, but first in Punjab and Haryana, because of electricity, there were areas where groundwater was easily available. So electricity was free, water was free, you could pump it all out, land was fertile, and while the local farmers may not have had such skills at growing paddy, now farm labor imports were possible from the Hindi heartland. So that is how laborers from eastern UP, Bihar started coming in, and railways actually began to run labor specials. Now there was also some tradition of growing rice, but that was basmati. Basmati is value added rice because it gives you much higher price. So you don't need MSP for basmati. But Haryana and Punjab also became the rice bowl of India in terms of producing surpluses. Now as long as India was short of wheat and rice, the rest of India, this was a blessing, and MSP was a blessing because all this was acquired and then distributed in the rest of the country. But in the course of time, other states caught up because farmers are smart. So if you look at wheat, see how Madhya Pradesh and Chhattisgarh caught up. Madhya Pradesh also benefited from the Narmada Dam and Narmada dams, I would say, and the canal system. So irrigation also revolutionized in Madhya Pradesh as much as it had done in Punjab in the past. So Madhya Pradesh now increasingly began to produce larger wheat surpluses. Last year's Rabi, in fact, and we see what happens this year, last year's Rabi, Madhya Pradesh marginally beat Punjab in terms of its contribution to the national procurement pool. So MSP was an idea that came up in starvation years. It worked, but these are no longer starvation years. But what's happening is MSP, which was supposed to incentivize the farmer to invest in inputs and to adopt technologies, has now become a liability because it's now made the agricultural economy lazy. So Punjab and Haryana are both caught in this self-destructive paddy wheat cycle. So power is mostly free, water is free, everything you produce will be procured. How do you care? Where does it go? In the process, India has this ironical situation. It's a very cruel irony that India has too much wheat and too much rice. It's more than what India can eat. So if you look at June this year, and June this year is when the first tranche of what the central government was sending people, poor people across the country by way of free grain and a little bit of free dal, that had been delivered. Even after that, in June, India's norms for buffer stocks of wheat and rice said that in June, India should have had buffer stocks of 41.2 million tons of wheat and rice. How much did India hold? India was holding at that point 97 million tons of wheat and rice. That is 2.5 times, even after free distribution of so much. Where was that lying? Nobody has storage for this, because even if you build storage for this, next year more will come. You are not consuming it, so you will again build storage. So this is all lying in the open and rotting. So what's happening is that Government of India, Food Corporation of India, is buying this stuff because there is an MSP, and farmers have no incentive to switch to anything else or to diversify their farming practices and maybe look for more value, because this is guaranteed income. And this is now piling up. You want to know the economics of Food Corporation of India. The value of the excess stocks Food Corporation of India was holding in June, and I have it from Professor Ashok Gulati at ICRIER, the value of excess stocks that FCI was holding in June was 1,80,000 crores. Think about it. What is the debt of Food Corporation of India and what is the equity? The equity is below 5,000 crores. The debt now is 2 lakh crores because it just buys this stuff and keeps it. It can't sell it to anybody. So, I mean, any company, this is much worse than Air India. Any company with this kind of debt and this kind of equity base would have gone bankrupt a long time back. Okay, you might say it's a government department. Why do we care? Now, other vested interests have got built around this wheat rice economy. So some states, say Punjab and Haryana, they have put high levies on any purchases and sales in their mandis. So Punjab is worse than Haryana. Haryana still has about 2% by way of a mandi tax. Punjab or 2% and 2% by way of rural development cess. So 2 plus 2, 4%. So if you sell 1 quintal of wheat in Haryana mandi, you will pay 4% more by way of these cesses, 2% to your mandi board and 2% to the state government for rural development. In Punjab, it's 3% and 3%, so 6%. This 6% for a state like Punjab is not a little bit of money because Punjab is a small state with a small budget. Punjab is among the smaller states of India, not the largest states of India. Largest states I count as states which have more than 20 MPs going into parliament. Punjab is not there. But Punjab gets from this cess, the rural development cess, 1,700 crores a year. That is a very big income for Punjab government. And Punjab's Mandi board gets about 1,800 crores. So the Mandi board in Punjab and Haryana are very rich and politicians then die to head these. And these are among the rare things, entities in this region that are cash surplus. And how do they make this cash? By charging a cess on what the farmer sells to the government in the mandis that they run. So there is a big vested interest, and besides this, there is a 2.5% commission also charged by the Artiya, the commission agent. So 3 plus 3 plus 2.5, 8.5% arbitrage is available to the mandi board, to the government directly and to the Artiya. The fear is if private mandis come up, because private mandis, this new law says that state government cannot put any levies on the private mandis. That business will move from this to that because you will not be paying that much in cess and state government will suffer. So I think as I see negotiations going on, maybe, we don't know for sure, maybe the government, the central government is willing to relent on this and letting the state government levy their cess on it. But at the same time, central government is asking a question that you are raising this money for rural development. Show us where it's being spent on rural development. It's not. Most of it is being appropriated generally into the state's deficit and goes into paying salaries. Now, that having said, where does India go from here? And what is the point of these reforms? The point of these reforms is India has too much grain. So more entrepreneurial farmers, they should not be disincentivized from growing wheat and rice. If they do, it will be bought right now. It will be bought. In fact, paddy procurement this Kharif has been at a record level, and I suspect that's how wheat also will be. So these stockpiles will be piling up. But if private markets come in, if contract farming happens, then people might move to, or some people might move to vegetables, they might move to oil seeds, pulses. Now, India's import of oil seeds, vegetable oils, edible oils is $10 billion a year. $10 billion. It's a lot of money, a lot of imports. India's dependence is so much that Government of India has just had to bring down duties on imported palm oil because domestic edible oil prices were going up, adding to inflation. Now that's really helping other countries' economy, including economy of a country that has not been very kind to India, namely Malaysia, because Malaysia has been very hostile to India in many ways lately. But India has had to swallow its pride and cut those duties so the oil prices don't go up. So what if Punjab and Haryana were producing a lot more mustard, they were producing a lot more sunflower, they were producing groundnut as they used to in the past, then India will fill up the requirement of edible oils. So one, your import bill will come down, and second, your problem of just buying up these surpluses and storing them will go away. The second thing that happens is, you might say that what about a state like Bihar? Bihar does not have an APMC Act because they abolished in 2006. So are grain prices higher there? No, they are actually lower. So it shows you that APMC abolition doesn't work. I mean, you can look at it like that, but only if you start with that presumption. If you look at it more smartly, you will know the problem. The problem is, because of the law that the UPA passed, National Food Security Act, now government is supposed to buy this grain and distribute then at 2 rupees a kilo rice, 1 rupee a kilo wheat, or whatever it is right now, but generally that. So you buy at say 18 rupees a kilo. You spend another 5 rupees transporting it and storing it, and in wastages and pipeline leakages, it costs you 20 plus rupees a kilo. Then you sell it at 1 rupee a kilo. All right, that is the National Food Security Act. The poor must get cheap grain. But what happens then in a state like Bihar, for example? 3 million tons of rice is taken out essentially from Punjab and Haryana by Food Corporation of India at whatever the procurement price is, and then distributed in Bihar at 2 rupees a kilo. Now, if that's available at 2 rupees a kilo, why would Bihar farmers produce be selling at 10 times the price? It won't. So this actually ends up depressing the market prices in Bihar, and that happens with everything in states like that. So you buy expensive in one place, then you distribute cheap in another place. So what happens is, the farmer in that place gets cursed because his or her market is being ruined by this cheap, quote unquote, imports from another state. So this becomes a completely distorted economy. In fact, before GST came in, these cesses in Punjab and Haryana used to be 14.5%. So this was almost like extortion. So all that was being paid by the taxpayer, who was then giving it cheap to the poor, and meanwhile the grain that the poor were producing was not getting the value it should have in the market, because in a way their wealth was being vacuum cleaned by surplus grain producing states at a time when so much grain is not needed in India. Because today you have a situation where West Bengal, Assam, Bihar, Uttar Pradesh, they are all grain surplus. So this is not the India of the 60s and the 70s, and that's why the rules that we made, the innovations we made during the days of starvation are not going to work right now. So if you look at Punjab and Haryana, they are in this wheat and paddy cycle, which also leads to stubble burning and pollution, etc. So free water, waste of water, water level is falling. Then you produce too much paddy that nobody can consume and nobody needs. So water's gone, then you leave stubble, then you burn stubble, then you have pollution, and at the same time the farmer's income is not going up, because income can only go by 4%, 5%. That can be the increase in procurement price. So the farmer is caught in a trap. If you look at last 5 years, 50% of the wheat produced in Punjab and Haryana and 70% of the rice produced in these two states has been procured by Food Corporation of India. On the other hand, look at maize. Now India needs more maize. India has a booming poultry industry. India needs more maize. There is a procurement price for maize, but in the states that are growing maize, say Bihar for example, there is no procurement system. So maybe some of this mechanism and some of this investment should now move from agriculturally more rich and entrepreneurial states to poorer states. That is not to say either or. That is only if farmers in Punjab and Haryana move on to something more worthwhile. But for Punjab and Haryana, India does not have booming agriculture anywhere. That agricultural green revolution has been confined to Punjab and Haryana. That is not true. Punjab, Haryana have done well, but lately for the past many years, productivity and agricultural growth in Punjab has not gone up. Agricultural diversification in Punjab has also not gone up. Also, there is some citrus farming and stuff like that. Haryana that way has become a little more diversified, and Haryana has come up with a more innovative scheme to wean people away from paddy, from water wasting, water guzzling paddy. So Haryana is now offering its farmers who shift from paddy to any other crop 7,000 rupees an acre. That almost comes to about 17,000 rupees per hectare, 17,500 rupees per hectare, which is quite lucrative for farmers to shift. Now this will take time, because farmers also take time developing faith in the government that money will be paid on time and without any bribes and cuts. But this is a good approach, and maybe some of that approach, maybe a good approach for the center is to offer Punjab a package of 12,000 crores, Haryana a package of 8,000 crores, spread over say 4 years or 5 years, to wean people away from paddy and wheat to other crops. So there has to be a combination of things. Now, once again, before I conclude, I know that MSP, we think wheat and paddy, but there are 23 agricultural commodities on which MSP is applied, and you will see the list running on the screen. But basically it's paddy, jowar, bajra, makki, maize, ragi, arhar, tur dal, arhar, masoor, urad, groundnut, mungfali in shell, soybean, masoor dal, sunflower, rapeseed and mustard seed, sesamum, safflower, Niger seed, jute, copra, cotton, barley and gram, as in chana. Now chana is again something which India can produce a lot more of. India needs a lot more of, because it's also a dal. Also it needs much less water. That is the reason that say Madhya Pradesh and Rajasthan are India's champions in producing chanas. Pulses and oil seeds is what India is short of right now. So if farmers, more and more farmers in Punjab and Haryana could be persuaded to shift from wheat and rice to pulses, oil seeds, cotton, things like that, it will be good for them, it will be good for India, it will be good for India's trade balance, and it will be good for the overall pricing situation in India, and also they could make more profits from that. But to make people change, to make a shift from what they become comfortable with in the course of time, particularly the farming communities, is not easy. You cannot do it by coercion, you have to do it by persuasion. So these laws in a way are a nudge. Possibly the government has been remiss in not explaining this sufficiently to the farmer and giving these to the farmer on a top-down basis, that we are giving it to you, you will do it. I think this law, whoever thought of this law to send farmers to jail for burning paddy stubble, it is the most thoughtless, arrogant idea that only somebody in Lutyens, Delhi, with no idea of the situation and sentiments on the ground could have thought of. That is a law which even I would say should be repealed or should be withdrawn for now. But otherwise, reach out to the farmer, persuade them, incentivize them. It will cost some money today, but it will be a very good investment going ahead.